This award is known as the Westpac Woman of Influence Award. And in 2020, which the awards were held last week in Auckland, in the rural category, Dr. Trish Fraser from Plant and Food was recognised for her 3 decades of dedication and contribution to the rural sector and rural community, making her the only winner in this particular category from the South Island this year. The judges praised her collaborative approach and her rare skill of communicating science to farmers. I can tell you from experience that is a challenge, and for every scientist who can communicate, we can certainly grow this industry. We are joined now by Dr. Trish Fraser from Plant and Food. Congratulations, Trish. How very, very exciting.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yes, it was very exciting and very unexpected to win last week.
And of course, let's acknowledge the finalists in the particular category. It's certainly a high calibre of women that represent the rural sector in a position of influence.
Absolutely. There were 7 finalists, and I really had not expected at all to win. And so I thought one of those were far more worthy than I was. But I was very delighted when they announced my name on the night.
So therefore, I mean, you've been described as a bit of a trailblazer in the soil science world over the last 30 years. Can you start by letting us know what it was like 30 years ago as a woman in this particular field?
Yes, we were a bit of a rare breed, really. There weren't many women in the industry in soil science at all. I do recall very soon after joining Crop and Food, as it was called then, it's now Plant and Food, but research, going to a field day, and around 150 farmers were present, and I was talking to the farmers, and one of my colleagues who'd come with me said to me, "Trish, do you realise you're the only woman here?" And I looked around and went, "Oh, I suppose I am." And it was so normal that I really hadn't noticed that I was the only one present. But the farmers were all very nice to me back in the day. But I think I was a bit of a novelty, really, being female and especially at that stage being quite young.
It's, yes, a novelty, and they are very nice to you until you're trying to progress an agenda against status quo. And you have had significant influence in the direction of soil science in this country. What was it like having tough conversations around change?
I think, farmers are kinesthetic learners, and they like to touch and feel things and see them shown to them. So I tended to like to show them demonstrations, and soil, let's face it, is not a very sexy subject, and you have to find something to liven it up a little bit. And so if you could actually demonstrate in front of their eyes that things were whereas you were saying they were, then I think they were more likely to take on board that change and conduct things in different ways. And so I think I was a bit different in that I talked a lot about soil biology and soil physics. Everybody else was really focusing on the soil chemistry, which is, the fertility of the soil and what nutrients the plants need was probably the main focus. But talking about biology and soil physics was, and still to some degree is, more neglected than the soil chemistry. So trying to explain some of that is quite difficult.
Trish, you've been at the forefront of soil research in the cropping sector and based here in Canterbury. What sort of changes have you seen over the last 30 years in cropping farmers' appreciation for what's under their feet?
Yes, I think the farmers now understand a lot more than they did 30 years ago. They have an appreciation that when they conduct management practices such as tillage to the soil, they can have an impact on the properties of the soil, and in particular the soil physical structure. And so I think they understand more now that you shouldn't be cultivating. We used to call it recreational tillage. Sometimes farmers did another pass just to make it look nice and level. That's disappeared, because also they've realised now that there's an economic factor to that, and they don't really need to have that extra pass. It looks nice and everyone thinks it looks better than it did, but in actual fact, it's not needed. So some of those extra passes have reduced. We've seen quite a lot of change in that regard, and a lot of the passes are less intensive than they used to be. The type of cultivation that's conducted, for example, rotary hoes, which are quite pulverizing of the soil, have reduced in use.
Let's talk about your role in shaping the soil science fraternity through the New Zealand Society for Soil Science. You've been a member since 1989, served as secretary for 20 years, vice president for 2, and were the first woman president 2012 to 2014, and immediate past president up until 2016, considerably at the helm of governance in regards to the society around soil science. What are the general conversations and themes happening within that governance structure about attracting more soil scientists into the area of this, and as well as, like you said, and I may use your words, make it sexy?
Right. Well, yes. Over the years, I found being involved with the society was highly beneficial, because every year, every second year, the members of the council changed, and I was exposed to lots of different people with different skills and whatnot. And some of the main things was lobbying to government around the importance of soil, because soil really was not seen as important 20, 30 years ago as it is today. I think I've seen a lot more evidence in the last couple of years and at government level in terms of looking at the importance of soil. For example, urban sprawl from Auckland recently, you're seeing a lot of things in the news around buildings being put on the Pukekohe landscape, when that's where we have our vegetable bowl of vegetables grown in Pukekohe, for example, and those soils are being built upon. And once they're built upon, you don't get them back again. So it's really important that we look at soil protection, and so that there is no national policy on soils, and that's something that has been advocated over time. It hasn't come into being yet, but I potentially see it coming.
Fantastic to hear. Do you believe, though, that with the trend from a consumer perspective over the last 10 to 20 years to organic, and then New Zealand's interest in regenerative farming, we will see a swing to the appreciation of our soil and what it gives us in terms of life?
I think we've already seen a swing towards that in the last 20 years. Back in the 1990s, my colleagues and we were involved a lot with soil quality measurements, which is a measure of soil health. And we were, for example, my colleague Mike Baer made a kit that was to measure on-farm measurements of soil quality. And to be quite honest, nobody was really interested. And that was 20 years ago. Turn the corner to now, and you'll see that suddenly everyone's interested in measuring soil quality. So, we were ahead of our time, if you like, at that point in time, and now people are catching up. So I think in that sense, yes, I think soil quality is being more appreciated, understood that it can impact on your yields. If you destroy the soil structure, you can have a yield effect and an environmental effect. Environmental effect, of course, is coming to the fore. Then the public is now understanding more about the environmental impacts that they were unaware of before. So I think, again, we were aware of those for quite considerable time ahead of the public, but the public are also catching up on that. So, yeah.
What is the major opportunities for New Zealand, the marketing of New Zealand food, on the basis of the quality and uniqueness of New Zealand's virgin and young soils in the rest of the world? I know there's a lot of work going on into the Waitaki area with Jersey Benny potatoes and their particular soils. Is there something we can clasp onto here to sell that New Zealand story around nutrients?
I think it's the way in which we manage the soil and look after the soil. I think we're ahead of the game in many respects. We have soil that is higher in organic matter, generally speaking, than many other countries around the world. Those young soils are higher in carbon, which is important. And in general, we have a higher amount than, say, over in Australia. They have a much lower percentage carbon than generally speaking in New Zealand. So we're at the forefront on the front foot, footing that, if you like. And so I think, yes, regenerative agriculture is getting a lot of press. There is a movement called regenerative agriculture, but there is also the word regenerative being used more in the sustainability sense. And I think that, or the conservation sense, there's a movement there that a lot of people have already taken some steps to do some more regenerative practices with a small r rather than with the big R. And so I think there's lots of things being done here already that would fit into that basket, if you like. We have less tillage being conducted. We have lots of cover crops being sown, and the land is much less often fallowed than it used to be. We used to see a lot of fallow in the landscape over the winter, but there was the realization that whilst it was fallow, the water was coming in the rainfall, and it was causing the nutrients to disappear and leach through the soil profile. So farmers changed their practices and started to grow cover crops over the winter. We don't see fallow as much at all now, and maybe for a short period when it has to be done, but really that practice has disappeared largely. So there have been a lot of changes, and I think farmers, as soon as I said, they're kinesthetic learners, as soon as they see what those changes can do, they'll pick them up. There'll be a rapid uptake, as long as they can see that there are some sensible benefits from and practical ways to do that.
And that's probably leading into my last question, is around your incredible skill to communicate science to farmers. Do you believe that we still have a real challenge within our Crown Research Institutes to be able to do this? Or do you think that there is a real shift and change in applied science?
Certainly it's far more encouraged now than it was for a time. I was probably unusual in that there weren't so many people who did go and communicate to farmers for a time from the CRIs, but I think there's a lot more people in getting involved there now than there were. And so, yes, I'm not so much of that trailblazer that you mentioned.
But actually, I've just discovered here on my script that you have also been incredible in terms of getting young primary school kids' hands in the soil, with 330 kids recently a grant to visit you at Plant and Food in Lincoln and understand more around scientific research. How rewarding is it giving back to the next generation?
Yes, I really enjoy seeing them understand more about science. A lot of them don't appreciate that science is around them all of the time. So, yes, we brought, this is a couple of years ago now, but we brought kids into plant and food research at Lincoln and helped them understand that there was even behind getting a bag of potato chips, how it was grown in the soil, what nutrients were required for the plant. Then we showed them that there were loads of different types of potatoes. There was breeding that could be done. And then we showed them that there was some research that needed to be done around the pests and diseases. So there was pest research, there was diseases research. And then finally, there was also food research in that, how did you cook those potatoes and how do they end up on your plate, whether they be chips or whether they be in other forms. So yes, I think hopefully it was enlightening for the children to realise that even just the humble potato has a huge amount of science sitting behind it.
Fantastic. That's an incredible way. And this is the thing, is if we don't actually explain how it individually affects that person, then they have no connection to why they should care. And you've got an innate ability to do so. Finally, again, just congratulations, Dr. Trish Fraser from Plant and Food Research. They're receiving that honourable title as the rural categories, the winner of the rural category at this year's Woman of Influence Awards. Absolutely incredible way of celebrating not only women in the sector, but those who are in a position of influence and have used it for good.
This is Sarah's Country.